In the final week of January, weapons marked for Ukraine stopped moving. 11 U.S. military flights, packed with shells and ammunition, suddenly froze. No explanation, no warning in Kyiv. Confusion turned to panic. In Washington, silence. Not even top White House officials knew who had given the order. But deep inside the Pentagon, a verbal directive had been quietly issued from the office of newly appointed Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. The president, sources say, had given no such instruction. An exclusive Reuters report states that early in President Trump's second term, a perplexing series of events unfolded, temporarily halting critical military aid to Ukraine for several days in February. 11 flights loaded with artillery shells and ammunition bound for Ukraine were grounded, leaving officials in Kyiv, Poland, and even within the American government scrambling for answers. The shipments were supposed to depart from Dover Air Force Base in Delaware and a U.S. base in Qatar, continuing the flow of military support that had been approved under the Biden administration. Instead, they sat idle as confusion mounted. The decision came at a pivotal moment when Ukrainian forces were struggling to hold ground against advancing Russian troops in eastern Ukraine and the strategically important Kursk region, where Ukrainian forces were losing ground and have since all but been expelled. But perhaps most striking was that top White House national security officials appeared completely unaware of who had ordered the pause. Frantic questions reached Washington from Ukrainians in Kyiv and from officials in Poland, where the shipments were coordinated, who had ordered the U.S. Transportation Command, known as Transcom, to halt the flights. Was it a permanent pause on all aid or just some? According to Transcom, records reviewed by Reuters and multiple sources, the verbal order originated from newly appointed Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth in office, coming shortly after a January 30th Oval Office meeting where Ukraine policy was discussed. The problem? The president reportedly issued no such instruction during that meeting. Some observers suggest this incident highlights the growing pains of a new administration where lines of authority remain unclear and communication channels are still being established. Though the confusion cost American taxpayers over $2 million in cancellation fees and left Ukrainian officials desperately seeking information through multiple diplomatic channels, when answers finally came, the Trump administration reportedly dismissed the incident as merely internal politics. This episode has raised concerns among allies about the consistency and reliability of American foreign policy decision-making under the new administration, especially regarding commitments to partners facing existential threats. The brief but chaotic weapons pause reveals deeper dysfunction within the new administration's national security apparatus. Multiple sources told Reuters the Pentagon was plagued by inexperienced staff, deep-seated grudges, and fundamental disagreements about America's role in the world. The disarray has become an open secret within the defense community, with a normal decision-making process that would involve extensive consultation and presidential approval being completely bypassed in this instance. This is consistent with the administration's policy to move fast, break things, and sort out later. That is their managing philosophy. That is great for Silicon Valley. But when you're talking about institutions that have been around for hundreds of years, you're going to run into problems. At the center of this foreign policy turmoil sits a philosophical battle between competing factions. On one side stand administration officials supporting continued aid to Ukraine like envoy Keith Kellogg. On the other, a cadre of anti-interventionist advisors who have long advocated for America to withdraw from overseas commitments, according to Reuters. Several of these advisors reportedly drafted proposals to pull back American support for Ukraine, even as other administration officials were attempting to broker peace negotiations. This internal contradiction complicated diplomatic efforts, angered Ukrainian officials, and pressured European allies to fill the void. The confusion became so severe that National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, who was just recently forced out and is expected to be nominated as UN ambassador, reportedly had to personally intervene to restart the weapons shipments. Despite the brief February stoppage and a longer, more formal aid freeze announced in March, the Biden-approved military assistance has resumed flowing to Ukraine, at least for now. Yet the administration's long-term policy remains ambiguous at best. The shipping of American weapons to Ukraine typically requires sign-off from multiple agencies and can take weeks or even months to complete. Most military assistance flows through a logistics hub in Poland before Ukrainian representatives transport it into the country, a complex process that was disrupted by the sudden, unexplained pause negotiating an end to the Russia-Ukraine war. Has been a complex and fluid situation that we are not going to detail every conversation among top administration officials throughout the process. The bottom line is the war is much closer to an end today than it was when President Trump took office. This claim comes as Trump has appointed real estate magnate Steve Wyckoff, alongside Keith Kellogg, to lead peace negotiations with both Russia and Ukraine. Meanwhile, Washington has signed a separate deal with Kyiv for rights to Ukraine's rare earth minerals, an arrangement American officials describe as an attempt to recoup money spent supporting Ukraine's war effort. The temporary aid disruption also comes amid unprecedented turmoil within the Pentagon itself. Several of Hegseth's top advisors were escorted from the building on April 15th after being accused of unauthorized disclosure of classified information. The defense secretary continues to face scrutiny about his own communications. Three sources familiar with the situation told Reuters that Hegseth misinterpreted discussions with the president about Ukraine policy and aid shipments. This miscommunication resulted in a decision that normally would have required intensive coordination across multiple government agencies and approval from the president himself, as Ukraine continues fighting for its survival against Russian forces. The reliability of American support remains an open question, one that both allies and adversaries are watching closely for answers.